Kane needs one more second. Check out all of his articles on LouRockwell.com and Mises.org, and all his great videos too. Thanks for coming, Glenn.
Throw on some specials, so everybody buy wings and beer, I guess. Cool. I'd like to get an idea of the composition of the crowd today. Are there any constitutionalists here? Any real conservatives? Any classic liberals? Any Ron Paul Republicans? Any minarchists? And I'm not going to ask if there are any anarchists here, because I know what the anarchists will do. They will immediately say, I am not participating in this guy's collectivist experiment. I refuse to make any noise. Who does he think he is? What does he think he's the man or something like that? I know how you guys think. If you're not sure whether you're a libertarian or not, I have a short survey. Would everybody like to take it? Good. If you think that 99% of the politicians give the rest a bad name, you might be a libertarian. If you think the taxes are ridiculously high, you might be a libertarian. If you think that the problem with civil servants is that way too many of them are neither civil nor servants, then you might be a libertarian. If you think that there are too many laws about too many things, then you might be a libertarian. Yay. If you think that no one should go to jail for smoking a flower, then you might be a libertarian. If you're glad that you don't get the government that you pay for, you might be a libertarian. If you believe that the only contract with America that America needs is the United States Constitution, you might be a libertarian. If you believe that the only gun permit that you need is the Second Amendment, then you might be a libertarian. If the only way that you can tell the difference between the right and the left is by which hand is going in your pocketbook, you might be a libertarian. If you believe that the left is way too left and that the right, at least the mainstream right, is just plain wrong, then you might be a libertarian. If you believe that polluters should pay for the environmental damage that they cause, then you might be a libertarian. And if you believe that everything should be bought and sold on the market, with the exception of politicians, you might be a libertarian. So, how many libertarians are there here today? Raise your hand. A while back, my wife and I started an insurance agency in Knoxville, Tennessee. We're doing something revolutionary here today that you guys are sort of an experiment in a new way to raise funds. It turns out that we can't sell home or auto policies across state lines because of the regulations, but we can sort of kind of sell things like life insurance. So I've arranged with the promoters of this event to lock the doors, and admission to today's event is free. To get in is free, but you're actually going to have to pay to get out, okay? So everybody's going to have to talk to me about some sort of insurance policy before they leave here today. Actually, I'm just kidding, although business isn't that great, so if you would, that'd be great. But the reason I bring that up is because starting your own business, especially business that buys and sells products or services, you start thinking a lot about selling and marketing. And I've been doing all sorts of research into sales, reading and listening to stuff by people like Zig Ziglar and folks like that. And as I often do, I then relate it back to how to advance liberty. And it's just mind-boggling to me, the fact that people can sell all sorts of stuff. They can sell waterless cookware, they can sell Ginsu knives, they can sell chia pets, but somehow we can't sell the most important thing in the world, human liberty, human freedom. And the reason, of course, is very simple. It's because we don't try. to sell it. We don't try to market it. You know, there's a debate that is constantly ongoing within libertarian circles. What is the best way to promote liberty? Is it through direct action, electoral politics, or is it through education? Now, I don't have anything against electoral politics. In fact, I think that we should try to advance liberty in whatever way that we possibly can, so long, of course, that it's peaceful and nonviolent. But nevertheless, I do pretty much fall into the education camp. However, my friends that are in the electoral politics camp bring up a really good point. You can go out and you can educate 10,000 people, but if those people don't take action, then all your efforts in education are worthless. And that's absolutely true. So what we have to do is we have to impart knowledge. We have to educate people in a way that also compels them to act upon what we said, to take action. In other words, we must market liberty. And we've got to get rid of this word education, because education is not the key. And it's a component, but it's marketing that we have to do. Harry Brown was extremely influential on my thinking. How many people here know who Harry Brown is? Harry Brown was a very noted financial commentator, newsletter writer. He was a two-time Libertarian Party presidential nominee. He wrote a book called How to Profit from the Coming Devaluation back in 1971, which accurately predicted that President Nixon was going to close the gold window, and that put him on the map. He also wrote another book that really everybody should read. It's often called the first libertarian self-help book. It's called How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World, and it's done wonders for me as far as how I look at the world and my interaction with it. But one of the things that Harry always said is that we have to market liberty. We have to become salesmen for liberty. Now, people all the time ask me, how can I have an impact? I'm not Ron Paul. I'm not going to run for political office. I don't write for a newspaper. I'm not on TV. Although I would say in this day and age, there's this thing called the internet, and anyone can start a blog or a website, and we should all do that. But in any case, I don't have the reach of a politician or of a media figure. I almost said an entertainment figure, because nowadays the lines between media and entertainment have been crossed. But I don't have that sort of reach. How can I have an impact? Well, what all of us can do is all of us can become salesmen for liberty. Look at how many people each of us touches in the course of our life. I mean, 10,000 people, 100,000 people, and of course, you're not going to sell to everybody. But nevertheless, there are people that you touch that this message will resonate with. Well, you may say, well, what I can do is so minute. I mean, it's a big world. There's so many people out there. How is that going to change anything? Well, I'd like to share a story with you guys. This reminds me of this grandfather and grandson are walking along the beach in the morning one day at low tide, and there's all these sand dollars on the beach, thousands and thousands of them. And the grandfather would walk a little bit, and he'd reach down, and he'd pick up a sand dollar, and he'd throw it out in the ocean. And the grandson asked what he was doing. And the grandfather said, well, what's going to happen with the sand dollar is he's not going to survive because he's out of water, the sun's baking it, he's going to dry up, and it's going to die. So he picks it up and throws it in the water, and the grandson says, yeah, Granddad, but what difference does it make? Look how many there are. And his grandfather reaches down, picks it up, and throws it out in the ocean and says, it makes all the difference in the world to that one. That's what we can do. And our efforts, which may seem like not a whole lot, build upon themselves. Okay? How many folks here think that you can change the world by setting out to change the world? You can't. You can't. Yeah, wrong answer. You can't. What you can do is change your corner of the world and then keep on making that corner of the world bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm here today because many years ago, a friend of mine, a coworker, just mentioned the term libertarianism to me. He said, "You sound like a libertarian." I was almost 30 years old, and it had been the first time in my life that I had ever even heard the term. And then from there, I went and I studied and I researched, and I was like, my gosh, not only, and I'll tell you, it's funny because when he said I was a libertarian, I was like, dude, you know, don't be calling me names. I will fight you right here, okay? But I found out, wow, I am a libertarian, and it makes a lot of sense. And since then, I have dedicated at least a portion of my life to trying to spread this message, to trying to advance liberty. Now, some of you may object to the use of the term sales or marketing in regards to liberty. I mean, what are you talking about here? Liberty is not a used car, okay? We're not going to be used car salesmen. And that's not what I'm saying in any case, but it also, I think that reveals a somewhat anti-market bias, if I can say that. You know, because if you look at the market and what happens when people buy and sell, is that a salesman doesn't actually, he's not a con man. He's not out there forcing people to buy a product, as the liberals often think that he is. What he's doing is he's persuading people to look at things from a different point of view. You see, no one enters into a transaction in the market without thinking that both sides are going to benefit. Unfortunately, we seem to be more concerned with debating and winning the debate as we do selling liberty. And the problem with the debate is that only one side wins, okay? I win the debate, but does the other person get anything out of it other than to feel bad because I feel stupid? In fact, I would like to quickly give you the typical libertarian sales pitch, and I say quickly because it goes something like this. I'm obviously right, you're obviously wrong. You know, that's it. Well, we're going to have to get over that, okay? And we're going to have to learn to market, and we're going to have to learn to sell, because guess what? The bad guys are really good salesmen. They're really good marketers. If you look at the history of America, how is it that we went from a country that was founded on the idea of liberty? You know, we never got there, unfortunately. It was very imperfect. But nevertheless, that's where this country was founded. How is it that now we have the biggest government that the world has ever seen? It's because the bad guys are great marketers. Okay? Sales is the name of the game, folks. And if you want to play, you're going to have to learn how. And look at what they do. Okay? With all this war on terror stuff, has any politician ever come out and said that I'm going to suspend the Bill of Rights or I'm going to take your liberties from you? No. What do? We need the tools necessary to protect you from criminals and terrorists. And we need to strike a balance between liberty and security. It's a marketing technique. Look at Social Security. They never came out and said, you people are too stupid and irresponsible to save for old age. What did they say? Give us that responsibility. Look at the welfare state. They have never come out and said, we think that you are too callous to take care of people in need and to help your neighbors. What do they say instead? We need to have a benevolent government that takes care of its citizens. It's all been marketing, folks. It's what we've faced through the years, and that's how our government has gotten so big. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a time and a place to debate people. For instance, you are going to find people that you're never going to convince of anything. And I shouldn't use the word convince because you're not trying to convince anybody. You can't convince anyone of anything. They have to convince themselves. All we can do is persuade. All we can do is try to get people to look at things from a different perspective. But nevertheless, there are people who are so married to their paradigms that you are never going to convince them or get them to convince themselves of anything. They will never discard their paradigm. For instance, how many of you guys are familiar with the name Paul Krugman? Yeah, boo, okay, you know it. Paul Krugman is a he won the Nobel Prize, and he's also a New York Times columnist, best-selling author, the whole deal. And Paul Krugman is, basically his advice is a lot of the reason that the country is suffering through the economic malaise that it is. He is a neo-Keynesian, money-printing megalomaniac who believes that the way that you solve everything is by having the government become more and more and more involved and by printing as much money as possible until the currency finally collapses and we all suffer a fiery death. Somehow he doesn't quite see that. In any case, you're not going to convince a guy like Paul Krugman that he's wrong. Okay? In fact, Paul Krugman will not debate Austrian economists. He's been offered $100,000 to go to charity if he would debate Bob Murphy. The closest that he's ever come is a debate with Ron Paul, about 10 minutes on one of the financial channels. And what was amazing about that was the fact that here you have a Nobel Prize winning economist debating a baby doctor. And the baby doctor more than held his own against the Nobel Prize winning economist. Now, if you were to switch these roles around, do you think that Paul Krugman would have been able to debate or even converse with Ron Paul about childbirth and taking care of babies? Absolutely not. And the reason isn't because Ron Paul's a very intelligent man, which he is. The reason is because Ron Paul knows his stuff and he is operating in a real world paradigm. He's using real economics, not whatever passes for economics in Paul Krugman's mind. Nevertheless, the value there is not in convincing Paul Krugman he's wrong, because you're not going to do it. The guy makes tons of money by promoting a false paradigm, by promoting this bogus nonsense economics. He has tons of prestige. You are never going to convince him he's wrong. But what did the people watching that program, at least some of them, do? They were like, how is it that a baby doctor can hang with a Nobel Prize winning economist? Maybe I should look into what that guy's saying because it makes sense and the other guy's stuff doesn't make sense. And that's what we can do. It's not so much trying to debate and win the debate against that person. It's trying to win the hearts and minds of all the people that are watching the debate. So there is a time and a place for debate. But I would urge you guys to understand that if you're just debating for the sake of debate, you are not advancing liberty. All you're doing is debating for your own entertainment, which is fine, but don't think that that's accomplishing anything, at least in the mind of your debating partner. Now, I'm not going to say that any of this is easy, okay? I'm not up here wearing rose-colored glasses and saying, all we have to do is sell liberty and everything's going to be okay and all this stuff. I realize that people are often married to the paradigms. It's very hard to get them to break out of the paradigms. But I do have some stories about how I've been able to do it. For instance, I have a friend who, years ago, when I started talking to him about this stuff, he was like, well, gosh, if the TSA isn't there, who's going to protect us on the airplanes? Well, a couple weeks ago, this guy comes up to me, he's like, hey, I have some scripts that I'm thinking about doing for some videos on Austrian economics. Would you like to check them out? So it can happen, but sometimes it just takes a while, okay? If we're going to sell liberty, the first thing that we have to do is we have to do what all good salespeople and all good marketing people do, and that is define our product. What is liberty? I'll give you my definition. This is very important because throughout history, what's happened is the bad guys, the really good marketers, have misconstrued, been able to throw all sorts of misconceptions, mischaracterize, and sometimes outright lie about our product. And they have made their product, statism, seem like it is far superior to our product, liberty. So what is liberty? That's pretty simple. It's based on this concept that you own yourself. And if you own yourself and you own your life, no one has the right to initiate violence against you without just cause. In other words, if you initiate violence against them, first, violence can be used in self-defense. Likewise, when we find something in nature, and in the words of John Locke, when we mix our labor with it, that becomes our property. It becomes a part of our life. And if someone takes that from us, again, without just cause, that again is a form of trespassing. It's called, libertarians call this the non-aggression axiom. Everything that we learned about politics and legal systems, we learned in the sandbox when we were kids. Don't hit, don't steal, don't start fights, and certainly don't murder people. But then when we get older, all that seems to go out the window. When the state gets involved, these common sense concepts, all of a sudden it all changes. Okay? It's somehow that if I can get enough people to agree with me that it's okay to hit, that it's okay to steal, that it's okay to murder, then it's okay. How can that be? If I don't have the right to do something as an individual, I can't give that right to someone else. If I don't have the title to a car, it's illegal for me to tell someone else, yeah, go ahead and drive the car, no big deal. It's not my car. I can't give it to anybody else. Likewise, if a bunch of us decide that's my car, it still doesn't make it my car. As Thomas Jefferson said, it's absurd to suppose that millions of people gathered together collectively are not bound by the same moral laws that bind each of us as individuals. There's another aspect or another idea about libertarianism is simply that the state should be held to the same moral standard that the individual is. And for the life of me, I fail to see how any of that could be considered radical or extreme, because it's absolutely not. It's also important to keep in mind, however, that libertarianism is a legal system. It is not a system of ethics. Just because libertarians believe that something should be allowed, that it should not be prohibited, does not mean that people should engage in that activity, nor does it mean that we condone or endorse this activity, especially if it's destructive. We libertarians simply believe that civil society, our communities, our families, our churches, our civic organizations are much better equipped to deal with destructive behaviors and destructive actions than the government is, because the government has only one way it can deal with anything, and that's with guns. That's by forcing people to do what they want them to do. If we look at the art of selling, we've defined our product, and if we look at the art of the science of selling, there are basically 4 reasons why people don't buy products. It's no need, no money, no urgency, and no trust. And I'll cover those very quickly. And also how we can use some sales techniques to maybe address and hopefully overcome these objections. The first of all is no need. I don't need your product. Why do I need liberty when the government takes care of me? Or that we need the government to do various things? I mean, my gosh, if we legalize marijuana, everybody's going to go out and smoke pot and stand around on the street corners and get in car wrecks, and it's going to be the worst thing that the world's ever seen. Despite the fact that's never happened anywhere where pot has been legalized. If we legalize prostitution, they're going to build brothels next to churches and schools, which again is never going to happen. But in any case, we can't say, no, that's never going to happen and you're stupid and you're being irrational. What we have to do is we have to flip it around and look through their eyes and see what they're really saying, what their concern is, and address that concern. Because often it's a legitimate concern. But often also what we're able to prove is that the government makes the problem worse. If you look at the war on drugs, drugs are a terrible thing. Let me tell you folks, in my industry, I'm in the entertainment industry, I know the damage that they can do. The war on drugs hasn't saved any of my friends. In fact, what it's probably done is it's probably prevented them from being saved, because by having criminal penalties on what they're doing, they're not going to go try to find help. So the people that could have helped them didn't, because they never sought them out. We also just look at the fact that when marijuana was made illegal, that's all we had was marijuana. Well, now, because marijuana is illegal, why not get the most bang for your buck? So we've seen cocaine, then we see crack cocaine, then we see methamphetamine, which are much worse than marijuana. We saw the same thing in Prohibition. Before Prohibition, America was a beer drinking country. During Prohibition, what happened? People started making whiskey and gin and all sorts of different hard liquors in their bathtubs, because that's where you can make the money. It's an economic problem, and it's one that should be dealt with, again, by our communities, by the churches, by our families, not by the government, because the government just keeps on making the problem worse and worse and worse. In Tennessee, now you're going to have to get a prescription to buy Sudafed, because the crystal meth problem is so bad there. Well, the thing is, they keep on outlawing more stuff we have to get a prescription to buy, more infringements on everybody's liberties. I don't want to end up getting on one of these lists, because they don't catch the bad guys anyway. They catch grandma that goes down to the store and buys too much Sudafed, because guess what? The bad guys know that there's laws against it. But then what happens too? Well, now Billy Bob, and I'm certainly not condoning meth or anything like that, but anyway, the guy in his trailer, they're not cooking meth anymore. The Mexican gangs are now bringing the meth in, who are much more violent, who are much more terrible than the guys that are just, as bad as that problem is. So what we have to do is we have to show people that when the government tries to solve a problem, often what they do is create all sorts of unintended consequences that we have to deal with. The next problem is no money. By no money, it's what do I have to give up to get this? In this case, what we're asking people to do is assume responsibility for their lives. See, the government has convinced people that it's going to take care of them. But what it's really done is it's put us in a bit of a box. Okay, you have a floor under you that you're not going to fall down under. But you also have a lid right above you, glass ceiling, that you're never going to be able to break through. We're not convincing or trying to convince people or telling people that you have to give anything up. What we're telling them is that you have to demand your birthright as human beings. You're allowed to live. The government gives you what you need to live to survive, but you're not allowed to thrive. How many geniuses do you think we've lost because they never had to go out and actually live? How many Albert Einsteins have we lost because the government gives people checks and says, here, you should be happy with that, instead of really going out and living the life of your dream and fulfilling your potential as a human being? How many have we lost because instead of building and making products and research and inventions that society could really use, they've gone where the government pushes the money, say into the financial sector? Why is it that the financial sector makes all the money? Why is it that the bankers make all the money? Where do you think that the smart people go? Do they go into medicine? Do they go into engineering? Do they go into physics? They end up going to the financial sector because that's where all the money is. And the reason the money is there is because we have this institution called the Federal Reserve, which cranks out money, and the first place it goes is into the financial sector. That's where the money is. I have a very good friend who's a nuclear physicist. And in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, we have the national laboratories, the Y-12 plant in Oak Ridge. And if you're a nuclear physicist, that's where you go get a job. You're working on atomic bombs, basically. Why is that? We have, why are these people not trying to develop new forms of nuclear energy, clean nuclear energy, which actually is, it's actually, do you guys know the story about thorium? As an aside, I'm going to tell you that real quick, right? So, yeah, back in, the reason that we have the reactors that we have, which are uranium reactors and pressurized and very dangerous, is because the Department of Defense wanted the byproduct from those reactors to build nuclear weapons, which is uranium-238 plutonium, I believe. So that's why all the money and the research was devoted into building those sorts of reactors. Well, there's another element called thorium, which they can make reactors out of. Thorium is essentially completely safe. It has 1/10 of the waste products that uranium does. And the plants can't melt down because they don't have to be pressurized like the uranium plants are. So because of that, because the Department of Defense wanted nuclear weapons, now we really do have a possible environmental disaster just like on our hands, just like we saw in Fukushima, because we have all these nuclear power plants around the country that are inherently much more dangerous than they would have to be. But then people still don't think that they have the money to pay for personal responsibility and the free market. The number 3 reason that people don't buy stuff is because they don't have any urgency to buy it. They're not in a hurry. Why should I buy this now? Well, I could do a whole speech about why people really need to be looking at free markets, because this economic paradigm which we currently suffer under is about to go away. See, we have $17 trillion national debt. We have hundreds of trillions of dollars in unfunded liability. It's all unsustainable, and there's a law in nature that unsustainable things do not last. But what we have to do is we have to make that personal to people, because these numbers are so huge that they become completely abstract. Who cares if you have $17 trillion national debt? I don't even know what that means. $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities, I don't even know what that means either. What you have to convince people of, or again, change their perspective, come at them from a different perspective, so they can convince themselves, is how is that going to affect you? Before I got up here, we were just talking about paying off the national debt. National debt is never going to be paid off because it's too big, and they have no plans on doing that. So what are they going to do? They're going to print money like crazy to deal with not only the national debt, but also the unfunded liabilities, to keep interest rates low so the economy doesn't collapse in the meantime. What does that mean for you as an individual? That means that the price of everything that you buy is going to go up. That means that all the economic dislocations that the government, the Federal Reserve, are causing is going to have dramatic effects on our economy and your ability to make ends meet. It wasn't the free market that did all this. It was the government. And that time is coming very quickly. I don't know when it happens, but it is going to happen at some point in time. So there is a matter of urgency here. And the fourth reason that people don't buy things is because of no trust. They don't trust the salesperson. Folks, we've got to be good people. We have to live our lives with integrity, okay? If we want to advance liberty. Unfortunately, for better or for worse, when people know that you're a libertarian, you become a representative of the movement, and they will base the movement off of you. One thing that I heard a Libertarian Party candidate say once that really stuck with me is the fact that people may think that libertarians are crazy, some of our ideas, but they also know that we have principles and courage because we still follow through on those ideas. And unlike other politicians, we don't lie. We tell the truth. Because basically only a crazy person would tell the truth that people don't want to hear. But nevertheless, it's true. We have to have, if you want to be a salesman for liberty, you have to have people trust you as an individual. I know it can be really discouraging, especially when it never seems like we're getting ahead. And this happens quite often. You talk with someone and you do the best that you can, and they sort of blow you off, or what you're saying falls on deaf ears. It's also quite discouraging to look at the news reports nowadays and see all the things that are happening out there with the economy, with the fact that the government is spying on all of us pretty much all the time. All these revelations that keep on coming out. The fact, like, no matter what, in the Middle East, it keeps on flaring up, and the federal government seems to always want to be involved there. But nevertheless, you can't be completely discouraged, folks, because what we're doing is we're chipping away at a wall, and we're trying to make progress as much as we possibly can. And we will do so. It's just not going to happen overnight. One time there were these two salesmen that went to a third world country. They were shoe salesmen. And they get off the plane and they're there for a couple weeks. And the one salesman finally calls the home office and he's like, I'm coming home. He's like, this place is impossible because no one here wears shoes. So how can I sell shoes? So the other salesman calls about a couple hours later and he says, man, this is the most awesome opportunity I've ever had in my entire life. And the home office says, what are you talking about? Bob just called in and says that no one there wears shoes. He's like, exactly, this is an untapped market. That's where we have to be thinking as well, folks. Because I really do think that there is a thirst in everybody for liberty. It's just been beaten down and beaten out of a lot of us. But it's still there. Everybody wants a better life for their kids. Everybody wants a better life for themselves. Everybody wants a higher standard of living. Everybody wants to build the life that they want, that they are capable of, the opportunity for that. Everybody still wants to live the American dream. It's just hard to cut through all the noise and get them to see what that really is. We are standing on the brink of the greatest opportunity in human history, in my mind. Because this paradigm is going away. It can't last much longer. It is unsustainable. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is going to replace it? It's not about fighting as things currently are, because they're going to change. Wayne Gretzky, the great hockey player, said when they asked him, to what do you attribute your success, he was like, I skate to where the puck is going to be, not to where it currently is. The danger, of course, is that the bad guys are going to use the next several years, the next decade, to push their own agenda. So what we have to do is we have to do our job now. We have to market liberty, because when all of this happens, and it is going to happen, people are going to be looking for answers. and we have the answers, but it's going to be a very emotional time. It's going to be a very traumatic time. There's going to be lots of turmoil, and that's not the best time to approach people about stuff. We need to already have put the idea in their head. What we need to be doing is we need to be putting splinters in people's minds that they can't get out, that makes them think. One time I was in Knoxville. This is when the 2008 presidential campaign, and there was a group of Hillary Clinton supporters that were having a sine wave. So I thought I'd have a little fun, right? And I went over and I asked one of the people there, who was an older gentleman, it's like, why do you like Hillary? And he tells me, he's like, I need to get my group leader to talk to you. Now, I thought that blew my mind, because I know that if I ask anybody in this group, why do you like Ron Paul? For 2 hours, I'd be sitting there going, my gosh, why in the world did I ask that question? I can't get away from this person. No one here is going to say, let me go get someone to explain why. Anyway, so he goes and he gets their group leader, who is this young girl, and I asked her the same question. Thank you. And, excuse me. And she says, well, it's because Hillary is for healthcare and education. And I'm like, well, that's great. I am too. I just don't think they should be supplied at gunpoint. And she puts up her hands. No, seriously, she puts up her hands and she takes 2 steps back away from me and she says, who said anything about guns? And I'm like, well, you did. Because if I choose not to participate in your system, then men with guns will come and they will make me either participate or they will throw me in jail, and they claim the right to kill me if I do not participate. Now, that didn't change her mind. In fact, she called me an anarchist. And that was the end of the conversation. But nevertheless, there will come a point, perhaps, in her life where she will realize what I am talking about. When she actually has to deal, when the government takes off the velvet glove and hits her with that steel fist, she may think, my gosh, this is what that crazy guy was talking about way back in the day. Okay? So, even the greatest products in the world are going to sit on the shelf if they don't have a good marketing plan and good marketers, good salespeople. Liberty is the greatest product on the planet, but we've got to learn how to sell it. Thank you guys very much. You guys want to do questions and answers and stuff like that?
Sure, there's lots of
Oh, cool. Yeah, go ahead,
So,
please.
in retrospect, how would you have reapproached that sale about the healthcare?
With her, I wouldn't have. Look,
Some sales you can't make.
no, no. And what you're going to do with, I mean, like I said, I don't know. She may have just thought I was crazy and never think about that again. I don't know. Unfortunately, people have become brainwashed. I mean, we spend, 12, in some cases 16 years indoctrinating our youth into statism, and it's very hard to break them out of that paradigm with a 3-minute conversation. But, all I was trying to do was trying to turn it into something that you've never heard before. And I don't know how effective it was. That's really up to her, And one of my favorite newsletter writers is a guy named Richard Mayberry. Does anybody here read Richard Mayberry's early warning report? Okay. Actually, and I sort of came across Mayberry from reading Harry Brown, because they think a lot along the same lines with financial and economic stuff. But in any case, when you subscribe to the early warning report, the first letter that you get is basically an overview of what you're going to be reading about over the next year with all your issues. And he talks about something I never really considered before, but he talks about paradigms and worldviews and people's models. Okay? What happens, and if you've seen some of my other speeches, I talk about this, is we don't experience reality directly. Okay? Our minds are locked away in this bony prison that we call our skulls. So, the only way that we interact with the world is through our senses, through our 5 senses. That's how we get information coming in. Well, the problem is there's all sorts of gaps in that information as it comes in. We can't know everything about the world, especially when it comes to things like abstract concepts. If you were to ask Glenn, what is economics? How can you define that? Okay? I mean, I know what my economy is, but what is economics as far as the world economy? I have no baseline for that. I don't know. So I fill in the blanks by reading, by listening to people, and also in your own experience, through experiences, okay? Why don't you touch the hot stove a second time? Because you found out the first time that it burns and it hurts you. You wouldn't know that unless you maybe experienced it, unless your parents told you that. And that's the problem, is we develop these paradigms and they become our reality. They become our identity. And when you tell people your paradigm is wrong and your paradigm is flawed, what are you really saying? You're not the person that you think you are. Your identity is wrong. Your self-identity is flawed. And that is, I mean, that causes a lot of trouble in people's psyches. Going back to Paul Krugman, you know, if Paul Krugman one night were to wake up and have an epiphany and go, Mises was right, he would go insane. Seriously. Not because he's not, you know, I don't like, and I rip on him a lot, and he's probably a nice guy and everything, I don't know, but he's locked up, yeah, okay. He's locked into this paradigm, you know, that says this is the way the world works, and all of a sudden you shake him out of that paradigm, and it's like, oh my gosh, you know, nothing is like I thought it was. There's a really good book by a guy, Lawrence Gonzalez, I think is his name, and it's called Deep Survival, Why Some People That Die and Some People Live in Extreme Situations. And this doesn't have to do necessarily with psychology like that, but what he looks at is why people die out when things change. And what he found was that it's the people that can discard their paradigm the most quickly and adapt to the new reality that they faced in extreme outdoor situations that survive. And sometimes having a strong paradigm will get you killed. For example, he tells this story about this guy who was an Army Ranger, and he was whitewater rafting, and dude's highly trained, you know, very competent, great swimmer. He falls out of the boat. He didn't know the water. The guy reaches down to pull him back in. The Army Ranger actually shoves the dude away from him and then gets sucked under, gets his foot caught between 2 rocks, and drowns. And the guide said that he giggled when I tried to reach and help him. The reason he giggled was because he was an Army Ranger who didn't need anyone to help him because he was a world-class swimmer, and his training also told him that he needed to be strong and autonomous, that he needed to do it himself, and he could. And that got him killed. And there's all sorts of situations that we see like that. There's another story he tells about this lady. She was a world-class rappeller, and her stuff became automatic. You know, she would just tie the knots and blah, blah, blah. And she said one day she's up on top of the cliff, and as she's tying the knots, someone approaches her and says something, and so she replies, and then she steps off the cliff and falls 180 feet because it interrupted her automatic processes, and she didn't tie the last knot because she was sure that she did, because her training told her that she did, because she had these automatic processes, but when they became interrupted, it almost got her killed. And we need to look at the same thing, and this is a long-winded answer, which I tend to do, but we need to look at the same thing in this regard, is you're dealing with people who have very strong paradigms, who have very strong beliefs, even though they may not know it. That's why people get mad at you. That's why often the people that are closest to us, when we try to talk to them about these issues, you know, think that we're being irrational, think that we're being crazy. Because to them we are, because what we're saying is crazy to that particular paradigm. And of course, because there's an emotional attachment as well, it's often, I find anyway, it's the people that are the closest to me that I have the hardest time talking to. I can talk to a stranger, but someone in my own family, dude, you're whacked, you're out of your mind, I don't want to hear it anymore. So, yes, sir.
So most people are emotional rather than logical.
Yes.
How do you make the emotional sale?
Well, what I've been trying to do a lot, I write every once in a while for the Daily Caller website, and I talk a lot about poor people in it, despite the fact that it's a conservative website, despite the fact that I'm a libertarian, because that's an issue that resonates with a lot of folks. You hear what's going to happen with the poor people, okay? You look at, one of the things that really bothers me is the fact that the free market, or what we have currently, has been characterized as free market when it's crony capitalism. And what does it do? It hurts poor people the worst. As bad as social welfare is, and as bad as destructive as social welfare is, it's actually the corporate welfare, which is much more expensive. The corporate welfare and it's the corporate welfare which has really changed our entire economy. And poor people can't get ahead. And one of the things that sort of drives me nuts about conservatives, it's all the poor's fault. Well, yeah, there's still a lot of opportunities here, but they're also playing in a stacked game. It's a stacked deck at this point. They do not have the opportunities that they would have in a free market. And then you have the government coming along and saying, look, we'll take care of you. You just have to depend on us. So we have this regrettable environment of dependency, and then you have people now who have been in this system for 2 or 3 generations, So it's not just giving people facts, but it's also showing them how this relates to them personally and the impact. I can sit here all day and I can give you facts about the economy. And I can talk about the debt. I can talk about deficits. I can talk about malinvestment. That doesn't matter. What matters is, how does it affect you? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for your kids? Look at the student loan bubble. It's not the gargantuan nature of the bubble that people are thinking about, because that's an abstraction if we go back to thinking about paradigms. It's, why does your kid have $75,000 in student debt and can't find a job because they got a degree in interior design? That's what it's about. It's about trying to make it personal and showing people how it affects them, and trying to make those emotional arguments, which, especially because as libertarians, we tend to think logically, and we really do. And I'm not saying that's superior to other people. We just think differently than the average person does. It's like when I talk about the war on drugs, drug abuse is terrible. Illicit drugs are the worst thing you can possibly do. If you look back at all the tragedies and all the terrible things that have happened to people, often it's a result of illicit drugs. How do we help those people? That's my concern. How do we help them? And that's an emotional argument in itself. Again, I can go, and look at the prison population, look at the waste, the trillions of dollars that have been wasted on that particular government program, all these things. But my concern, and this is true, my concern is, how do we help those people? What is the best way to help them? What is the best way to get, for society, for our families, and all that sort of stuff? Also, again, the reason that it really bothers me about, as I was talking about how much we have these new designer drugs, which are so terrible, is because I don't want, I don't really want people smoking pot. That's a personal bias of my own. I realize that a lot of you may not agree with that, but that's my own personal bias. I think that it is destructive. But I think we can all agree that I'd rather have my kids smoke pot than take crack. And that's because of the stupid war on drugs. That's where we've gotten at this point, is that people are, you know, you smoke pot, you become a stoner, you take crack or some of this other stuff, you die. And that ticks me off. And it really does. And then I'm accused of not being compassionate or being stupid or not knowing what I'm talking about, you know, or not caring about society, when I do very deeply care about all those issues. And it's the other people that are either speaking out of ignorance or because they make money off of it that ticks me off. Yes, sir.
If you're a good salesman, you ask a lot of open-ended questions. And thinking about this, if you're trying to have somebody convince themselves that they're a libertarian, what would be your go-to open-ended questions to ask somebody who's completely oblivious to what we stand for?
Sure. And that is true. You have to ask a lot of questions as a salesperson. You have to find out what makes the other person tick. You have to find out what issues are important to them. Again, you know, because people go through this 12 or 16 year period of indoctrination, that becomes very difficult, because all of a sudden, you know, why? Okay, excuse me. Why, you know, you have the old deal. I saw this cartoon, and it was libertarian speed dating, and the guy's sitting there, and there's a girl across from him, and she says, "What about the roads?" Next. But it's true. If people assume that the government has always taken care of the roads because the government has to take care of the roads because they've always taken care of the roads because they have to take care of the roads because they've always taken care of the roads because they have to take care of the roads. And they don't realize that there are historic examples where that is not the case, where private industry has taken care of the roads and supplies the roads. And they also don't realize that the reason the government takes control of the roads is not for benevolent purposes, but rather to control the roads militarily, and then it just sort of goes out from there. So, yes, you have to break through, and you have to ask a lot of questions. My go-to thing is to show people, as individuals, this is how we relate to one another. We don't use violence, most people, in our day-to-day lives. The whole deal about self-ownership and the whole deal about the non-aggression action are very powerful marketing tools, because that's how most people live their lives. And then from there, move into, why is it then that it's okay for when the government gets involved, when the state gets involved, for them to do these things? Especially if I could show you that the market is quite capable of doing these things as well. So that's sort of my go-to deal, and it's also going to depend on your audience, and we really have to know our audience, okay? My touchy-feely approach to certain things is not going to go over well with maybe a hardline conservative, you know? And my figure approach is not going to go over with a liberal, right? So you have to know your audience, and then you have to cater to that particular audience. You know, if you look and you want to talk about foreign policy, you know, if I'm talking with conservatives, where do I start? I start with the enormous amount of debt that we have and the huge deficit, and how much of that is related to military spending. A tremendous amount of it. We can't afford that anymore. It's going to collapse the economy, you know? And then you also can get into, and why in the world, you know, the United States still has troops based in Japan, in Korea, in Germany, and we pay for that. Now we're starting to see again, foreign aid is really becoming a big issue, because people are like, man, we can't afford to pay for the stuff here at home, but we're sending billions of dollars overseas. So that's one place to start. Not to say again, you know, sometimes people are sort of emotionally married to their issues, but it's understanding your audience, understanding what makes them tick, as you said, asking a bunch of questions to get to it, and then trying to figure out ways, I guess, to circumnavigate those defenses that they're going to throw up, and throw a Trojan horse in there, and, you know, get them to thinking. Yes, sir.
What would be like the first thing you would say to a non-believer?
The first thing I would say to a non-believer,
Now, not sarcasm.
right? No.
Destroy the
Again,
non-believer.
it's going to depend on the situation. You know.
Give me a couple examples.
Well, I mean, they would have to say something first, I think.
That's okay.
You know, because it's really going to depend on the issue.
Who will build the
And
roads?
what's that?
Who will build the roads?
Who will build the roads? We may not even have roads if the government hadn't been involved all this time.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Yeah, there you go. No, but seriously, we may not have even had roads, and we may not be tied to the roads. And say if you look at Los Angeles, you know, Los Angeles is basically, in a lot of the American cities, there were a subsidy to Detroit because they were laid out in a way that people had to drive a long way, you know, and the roads put the trains out of business. And again, the interstate highway system was not built for convenience. It was built for the convenience of the military to move stuff, you know. So, but if someone's asking right about the roads right away, you may want to maybe start somewhere else. I like roads too. But I think one thing too, though, is how good are the roads, really? You know, especially, I tend to find that the states that have the biggest governments have the worst roads. You know, and you go up to certain states in the Northeast which have tremendous tolls, and they don't spend it on maintaining the roads. I'm going to tell you that right now, because they got the biggest potholes in North America. You know? So it all goes back to government efficiency. Yes, ma'am.
You said you were more interested in education than political office. Why would you run for political office?
Why would I not, or would?
Yeah, why haven't you?
I don't have. Well, I don't have time right now in my own life, and also I have a lot of respect for the people that do run for political office, because it is the dirtiest possible game that anyone could ever play. People get smeared. You know, the problem with politics now is there's so much money involved that if you say we're to run for a U.S. Congress seat, that is billions of dollars at stake, okay? Because between the subsidies and the tax breaks and all the various things that you will have a say in, you're literally controlling billions of dollars. And, you know, I think sometimes some of us are under the illusion that it's a fair fight, and it's not, because they control, you're playing on their playing field, you're playing with their referees, and they can rewrite the rules anytime they want to, and they do. And they do not try to beat you as a candidate, they try to destroy you as a human being. They try to destroy your family, because they want to make an example out of you that people like you don't belong there. So it's very difficult, and I have a lot of respect for the people that do get into politics and are able to sort of wade through all that stuff. The reason I say that I am more interested in education is because I do believe that the revolution is going to be from the bottom up. It's not going to come from the top down. You know, it's going to come from people like us out there doing the work at a grassroots level that at some point is going to impact the politicians, and at some point, you know, we will get more people into office. But also, you know, there's a lot of other problems with electoral politics. A lot of people get burned out. Like, you go through an election cycle, and your guy doesn't win, and okay, he didn't win, and now I'm all burnt out and everything. And you got to use politics for what it's good for, and that's, to me, education and marketing. And sometimes you win, but it's also going to be very difficult too, you know, because in the history of the U.S., you know, there's been one Ron Paul. That's it. I mean, out of the thousands of people in Congress, there's been one guy, and I can't say there's been others who are pretty good guys, but there's been one guy who has, just been a very outspoken advocate for liberty. And the reason that he was able to do that was because he was there for a long time, and he was finally able, they couldn't gerrymander him out of his district, and they couldn't get him not elected, so he knew that he could say stuff and not lose his position. But that's very difficult. And the idea that all of a sudden, we're going to have a bunch of people in Congress, that's probably not going to happen, although I wish it would. But what we can do is we can pressure the people that are already there. But that's not going to come, again, we're going to have to build our numbers up to be able to do that. I know I'm sounding wishy-washy. I'm certainly not trying to discourage anyone from politics. I'm not trying to disparage politics. Because again, I think good politicians and people and libertarians who get into office and who try, my hat's off to them. It's just a very hard thing to do and a very hard road to hoe. Scott?
HR 1207 was kind of the thing that Campaign for Liberty made its name on. My favorite article that you've written was a short one about your running into Barney Frank at the court. Could you tell that story quick?
Sure. Is he still in Congress?
I don't think he retired.
Yeah, he retired. Good. That way, okay, I can't get in trouble. So I'm flying from Boston to Washington, D.C. And this was at the time when Ron Paul had entered the Audit the Fed bill, and it was really gaining some momentum. Well, Barney Frank was the head of the committee that bill was going to, and there were some rumors that Mr. Frank was basically either going to shelve the bill or to water it down tremendously. So I'm flying from Boston to Washington, D.C., and guess who I see? I'm like, no way, that's Barney Frank. So, yeah, it was. So I go over and I shake his hand, and I'm like, Congressman Frank, I would like to thank you. I can't remember exactly what I said. Basically, I'd like to thank you for sponsors. Did he sponsor it too? Or he was in. It was weird what was happening. On the one hand, he was sort of pushing it, but on the other hand, we all thought that he was pushing it just so he would control it, and then he could do as he wanted anyway. So I'm like, yeah, and I said it is 1266.
1207.
1207. And he's like, well, which bill? I'd like to thank you for your support on HR 1207. He's like, which one is that? I was like, it's Audit the Fed. And I was like, what? Okay, but he's got a lot of stuff on his mind. And I said,
Are you going to water it down?
Are you going to water it down? Thank you. But I said it nicely. I don't think I actually said it like that. I was like, but it's not going to get watered down, is it? He's like, oh, no, Ron and I have talked a lot about it, and, the thing that we think is best to do is to put it as attachment to another bill or something like that. And I'm like, okay, well, because the American people do have a right to know what the Federal Reserve is doing, right? And all of a sudden he just goes like, look, you come over here like you got a chip on your shoulder or something like that from the beginning. I told you what we're going to do. Ah. And I got my hand out to shake it, and he just walked away. Yeah, seriously, that's what he did. And I was not mean. I was very polite, but Mr. Frank does have a reputation as being a very prickly old guy, and he certainly found it out, man. But I was like, okay, so I guess I had a 2-question limit on that one. And I went to my third one, and he just went off on me. And then I'm thinking, I was going to say something to him, but I'm in the middle of the airport, and there's TSA, and he's a U.S. congressman, so I better go over here and put my tail between my legs and go sit down.
And he did attach it to a larger bill and did water it down. And
Yeah.
Ron Paul, in typical Ron Paul fashion, voted
Against it.
Yeah, voted against his own bill. That's awesome.
Well anymore.
But, then that goes back to the point too, is, okay, what other customer service representative would have treated, granted I don't live in his district, he didn't know that, but what other customer service representative or merchant or entrepreneur or business person would have treated their customer like that, especially a knowledgeable customer? knowing, I would think that he should have known that if I knew the name of the bill and I knew all this stuff, I knew something about it, and I was probably going to say something about it, which I did. But that just goes to show you what these people, in a lot of cases, really think about us. Yes, sir.
My personal career, I'm an IT guy by trade. I've run into situations because of the non-aggression principle, having to draw a line in the sand. No, I won't do that in my professional career. How has the non-aggression principle done the same for you in your entertainment career?
I don't know if you watch what we do or not. We're pretty aggressive.
It's all voluntary.
Yeah, that is the thing. That is the thing. That's like, I was doing a news interview once, and the guy said something about that, and I was like, dude, it's all voluntary, so
They're there for a reason.
It's good. Yeah.
But has there been something that you're like, no, absolutely, I cannot do that. It violates. It goes past my own personal beliefs.
Not really. I've never really come across that. No.
You're lucky. Sucks in the IT world.
Really?
Yeah, I've been asked to spy on entire companies without first letting the employees know that they're going to be spied on.
Right.
And that was actually a fairly recent thing that I had to draw a line.
Well, yeah, and that's not even the non-aggression action. That's just ethics.
But the way that it was going, they were addressing against certain people, and they were going to swipe across the board. It was dirty, but it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a line in the sand that I was unfortunately forced to draw.
Right. Yeah.
And it was non-aggression principle that allowed me to draw the line. Otherwise, if I wasn't an adherent to that principle, then it would have been, okay.
Right.
We've got the technology, why not use it?
Right. Cool. Does anybody else have any questions or anything? Yes?
I got a very important question. In his prime, could you beat up Jesse the Body Ventura?
Probably. Okay.
Are you friends?
I've met Jesse once. Twice, actually. Yeah, that's it, though. Yeah. No, you and knitting.
Other avenues to advertise our beliefs. Other things that you recommend. I particularly use Facebook, and you've probably heard me by now, the Libertarian Homeschooler. She's got 40,000 followers, and I don't think she intended that when she first started.
Right.
But any other avenues, social media to push?
Well, yeah, social media. I think it's anything that we can think of, frankly. And that's the beauty about all of this is, as Ron Paul says, when people say, what should I do? It's like, do whatever you want to do whatever you can do whatever you're good at. And I'm the same way, because there are certain things that I can do that other folks can't. Likewise, there's stuff that other people can do that I can't. And I think one of the beautiful things about this movement as well is the fact that there is no headquarters, and there is no stuff coming from the top down that this person needs to do this and this person needs to do this and this person needs to do this. And instead, people do what they want to do, and that they get attracted to what they're good at, so they're more effective at that. By the same token, sometimes it does feel like we're herding cats, and it would be a little better to have some organization now and then, but that's the nature of what we're dealing with. And I have a very good friend, it says it's not that you should try to herd cats. What you need to do is just put out milk, and then people will show up, and if you give them the tools that they need, they'll go out and do it. And that's the other great thing is, the libertarian element and the patriot movement, whatever you want to call it, people tend to be a lot more into, a lot more enthusiastic than the statists are. The statists, aren't going to go out and do some of the things that we do and that the fine people here do. So I would say just keep on doing it and do whatever you want. And again, as long as it's peaceful, as long as it's nonviolent, as long as you respect private property rights, you should do whatever you
Are you
want.
doing a homeschooling thing with Mises in 10 days?
No,
What's the thing in 10 days with Mises?
I don't know.
It's on your schedule.
Okay. I don't know what it is.
Rockwell.
Yeah.
That was Lou Rockwell, right?
I don't know. Not that I know of. Not that I know of. I know Ron has the homeschooling project, and you know, which is a great deal, actually. That would be something I would encourage everyone with kids in looking into. But as far as me, I don't have anything going on in that venue.
Are you open-minded to coming back in April?
Sure.
Any more questions?
Okay, cool. Thank you, guys.
Are you open-minded to taking pictures of people that want to do photos? Okay, maybe.